Morning, everyone. Thank you for being here. Understand we're competing against John Kerry. I saw Tony Blair. I think Taylor Swift is downstairs doing something too. So appreciate you choosing us. Thank you. Very excited to be here. Hope you guys have had a good week, as good a week as we've had at Breakthrough Energy. I am personally super energized. Rodi's speech really set the tone for a week of learning, a week of connecting, a week of partnership. And that's what we want to try to do here this morning. As you know, I've been with Catalyst 18 months now and the team. And you know, we've learned so much over the past 18 months. And really, you know, we've taken on this mission of not only funding and investing in projects, but rather how do we teach the ecosystem what we do, our knowledge, and what we learn from you guys in order to move the ecosystem along, in order to really push everybody to be able to scale up and raise the capital. So for us, we love this because we've been working on it for a while, which is, you know, really putting into paper all the learnings that we've amassed from the ecosystem, right? And basically creating a playbook that we can share with you guys. So that is the unveiling today. We're very excited about it. We're going to unveil the playbook. And with me, there's 4 amazing CEOs that have gone through this journey that many of you are going through and are either deploying, raising capital, or getting ready to do that. So, you know, for us, super important that it's not a one-way conversation, but rather a, you know, dynamic, you know, learning experience for us. So what is, you know, when we thought about what Catalyst does and we were trying to do, for us, one of the biggest sort of shocks, as you know, the team is coming from the infrastructure investing background. And one of the biggest shocks we got here was not the lack of capital. Everyone says there's not enough capital for these projects. But really, you know, for us, it was the gap in language. It wasn't a gap in capital. It was a gap in language. It was a gap in expectations between what the VC investors expect and or startups expect, and what do infrastructure and project finance lenders actually want to invest in, right? So really, this playbook is meant to close that gap, the gap in language, the gap in expectations, and how do we get these projects and these companies ready for infrastructure investors? Because as you know, and you could see, the gap is very large, basically. For developed technologies, there's a lot of capital that has been moving more and more into the development phase of these projects, right? 10, 15 years ago, pension funds wouldn't touch development capital for solar or wind. Today, they invest billions of dollars in platforms that are doing just that. So how do we get climate tech to the same point? So we've drawn lessons from the past. We've drawn lessons from many things from Climate Tech 1.0. We've drawn lessons from things that have gone bad, and we've drawn lessons from things that have gone right. But why is this important? For us, it's important because, you know, unfortunately, VC growth equity is not enough to be able to fund the billions and trillions of dollars that's needed to build all this infrastructure. Unfortunately for us, again, that infra capital has a lot of experience investing in this. It can write very large tickets, $100, $500 million, right? It's not $5 to $10 million ticket sizes. And it has the lowest cost of capital, right? That is the reality. So again, the point is, how do we get climate tech technologies to be investable, to be de-risked enough to get to that point? So that's why we're here today. Let's talk about infrastructure investing. As frustrating as, you know, it sounds that they are, you know, they're checking 25 boxes on what an investment looks like, that is the reality of the industry. The reality of the industry is they have a very rigid set of criteria, and they want to check all those boxes. You know, the first one is they want the technology to have been deployed hundreds of times, and they want millions of operating hours behind that technology. Guess what? For emerging climate tech, that's just not the case. We're talking about first of a kind that is just not going to have that right off the bat. So, you know, the mission for us is not to check all the boxes, but rather to have as many boxes checked as possible and be able to convince the infrastructure investors and the project finance banks that these technologies are de-risked enough, so they start making a foray into it, right? The statistics are amazing, right? When you think about, the world of VC is a world where you can lose on 9 and make it all back on 1 investment, right? The world of infra funds is not like that, right? They don't lose money, right? And project finance banks also don't like to lose money. So that is what we're contending against. That is the big mountain that we have to climb in order to get there. Just to give you an example, today we have in the audience the CIO for Allianz Global Investors, Allianz Global Investors. She manages over $700 billion of money, $50 billion into infrastructure. Allianz Global Investors has put in. Deborah Surko. Deborah, how much money have you lost in that $50 billion portfolio?
Very teeny might have some issues. Oh, nothing. One teeny one might have a little bit of issues, but
exactly.
But you're absolutely right that our investors are looking to support growth in green technologies, but they're also looking for stable cash flows because they're living off them. So we have to find the right combination between the two, and we have to be mindful that our reputation is for taking the low risk and good return. So working with partners, people in this room, is important to us, and working with you.
Thank you, Deborah. Where's that? That is the bar we have to hit. We have to hit almost 0 loss bar, okay? So with that, again, the other side of this coin is for you guys that are projecting themselves, you guys that are raising Series A, Series B, you're raising $150 million to stand up your companies. The issue is when you start looking at what do you need to build the first project? What do you need to build the first 3 projects? And what happens is those numbers go up significantly very quickly. So if we take 2 technologies, here's the examples of 2 technologies. We looked at, out of our portfolio, we looked at technologies. One of them needed more than $1.5 billion for the first 3 projects, right, to get to some sort of steady state. The other one needed more than $5 billion, close to $5 billion. What happens with that is that if you keep funding yourselves with very expensive costs of capital, you're going to pay probably 3 times as much just on capital costs, right? And said another way, what we found is the product that comes out of these emerging climate technologies could be offered in those 2 cases for 65% less if you fund it yourself with infra capital and project finance capital. So the numbers are staggering in terms of driving the cost down for emerging climate technologies has, a big part of that is the cost of capital. And that's why we want to do what we can in order to move people to much cheaper cost of capital. So with that, as I said, the playbook is 12 keys to scaling up, how to access cheaper capital, right? And what we found is that, we try to amass all these lessons that we were learning from the ecosystem, try to distill them, and we put it into this, very long-form workshop. We're going to get the distilled version today. We're not going to go through the whole thing. But one of the first lessons we learned is that a lot of companies try to, they develop a technology and they felt that they had proven the science of the technology, right? And at that point, they said, look, I have proven this. Why won't people invest in this, right? It's proven, it's proven, it's proven. That's what we kept hearing all along. And the answer was that it wasn't de-risked enough, right? And the path to de-risking for us was, again, taking it from that pilot where it was proven, scaling it up to a demo, which is 5 to 10 times or 20 times that, but then going for a first-of-a-kind project. Because building that first-of-a-kind project, and most of the time it is startup's own capital, is existential to it. So for us, that is where we start with, do you commit to that first-of-a-kind project? Do you and your investors have that notion that you have to go through that pilot to demo through journey, to first-of-a-kind journey? And I think that is exactly what, we advocate. So here with me is Raef Sully from Lilac Systems. He is going to talk about committing to the first-of-a-kind project. He's trying to do that right now as we speak, but he committed to it. So he's going to talk about his experience. He's going to give us a little bit of background and his experience in committing to that first of a kind project. Thank you, Raef.
Thanks, Mario. Folks, good morning. It's good to be here. Appreciate the invite. Just a little bit of my background. I joined Lilac Solutions about a year ago. Lilac is a startup. We raised our Series C in January of this year. We have a technology for extracting lithium from brine. So we take the groundwater out of the ground, we run it through our system, we extract the lithium, and then we put the brine back in the ground. Very, very good compared to the existing means of extracting lithium. I've been at Lilac Solutions for about a year. I took over as CEO about 3 months ago. Prior to that, I had a year off, a sabbatical I call it. It was wonderful. I would encourage everybody to do that if they get a chance. And prior to that, I spent 10 years at a very large corporate called Nutrien. It's the largest agricultural inputs company in the world. And just a little bit of context, and it's important for this story. At Nutrien, I ran the potash business unit, and then I ran the nitrogen and the phosphate business unit. The nitrogen business unit was the third largest producer of ammonia in the world. We produced ammonia, urea, nitric acid. We produced all the phosphates that farmers use. These are all of the crop nutrients that if you're growing soybeans or corn in the Midwest, you put these on every year to replace the nutrients the crops are taking out of the soil. So just by numbers, over that 10-year period, I think I spent, with the organisation I was with, we probably spent about $12 billion in projects. Last year I was with them, EBITDA from my business unit was about $4 billion, revenue close to 10. And I've gone from that to a small startup with Lilac. We raised $145 million, very proud of that. It's got to go a long way. Okay, so I've been on both sides of this. At Nutrien, as the CEO of the nitrogen and the phosphate business unit, we would have many, many people come and talk to us about their new technology. A lot of people talking to us about new ways of making ammonia and other things. And so I learned a couple of things from that. First is you have to, let me make an observation. So Nutrien has very large cash flow, the opportunity to invest in these new technologies, but it is almost incapable of taking the risk that a startup would expect it to be able to take. Okay, it's just the way it is. There are reasons for that. No point in having big discussion about it. The truth is the largest companies out there in any ecosystem are probably those least likely to take risks that we would expect them to be able to take or want them to take. Before Nutrien would invest in a new technology, it had to see it. You had to be able to walk out and touch it and be able to see it working. Okay, before I could get the chance to invest or get the money from the board to invest in it as an expansion, okay? And so it became apparent to me, one of the first things I recognized at Lilac was we were only going to be successful if we could get our first plant at a commercial scale up and running. Unless I can take people to it and I can walk along and they can hear it working and they can see the white powder coming out at the back end, they're not going to believe it actually it works. Okay, so you've got to get to a point where you got the risk down to that level. Okay, so committing to that's really important. How big is a discussion we probably don't get into today, but you can think about what where you are in the industry, whatever your industry, and you can think about what a commercial facility looks like. It's going to have to be something close to what you see today. Okay, you've got to commit to it, and then you've got to work out how you fund it. The first lesson is the people who can take the risk won't. You have to find the money to do it yourself. And the second learning from me is it doesn't matter how confident you are about your technology working. It doesn't matter how many times you see positive results from the technology team. You will not get it working the way you want to until you're running it yourself. Okay, building that first plant, turning it on, and then learning those lessons are critical to then being able to sell the technology to somebody else. Okay, so that's my lesson. Worked both sides of this. And I just want to reinforce that Mario is absolutely right here. The first thing we need to do is commit to this first-of-a-kind project, get it up and running, find the funding for it, and then you've got an opportunity to take it out to the rest of the world.
Thank you, Raef. Appreciate it. All right. The next lesson, the next key decision point that we found in the ecosystem that was, this is one of the most controversial ones, right? Is the licensing route, right? We heard over and over and over again from CEOs that say, no, listen, I'm only going to take it to the pilot. I don't need to do a demo because after the pilot, I'm going to sell 100 licenses in the next couple of years. Everybody's going to want to buy this thing and they're going to go build it themselves. Again, we found that is not the case, right? It's like you showing up to IKEA and they give you a bunch of boards and you have to go figure out how to put it all together, right? Like somebody needs to give you that set of instructions, right, for a license. And unfortunately, until you do the pilot to demo to first of a kind, you won't have that, right? Licensing is also has a downside to it. So even if you could do it, and even if you convince somebody to go build something that has never been built before, the other downside is you're leaving it to someone else's hand. You're leaving it to someone else's hand to go and do it. And most of the time, licensing agreements, how do you really price them? You know, you have to commit to giving someone exclusivity over a country or region, and you're basically taking your baby that you've spent 7 years growing and funding, and you just giving it to somebody and hoping they can get it to college, right? And the truth of the matter is, a lot of times it doesn't work out. So here with us is Claudio Spadacini from Energy Dome. We committed to the first commercial scale demo in Sardinia that he's building. It is now being built, actually. We're probably gonna have an inauguration late this year, early next year, hopefully. But I think, you know, he's gone through pains on the licensing route, and I wanted him to share those with us. So Claudio, please.
Thank you very much, Mario, and to the World Breakthrough team for having me here. So it's really nice to be here and tell you something about our story, our, let's say, itinerary. And at the beginning, as Mario said, we had really to take this decision between licensing and doing things directly ourselves. And so we have started up in Italy, so the venture capital ecosystem is quite poor, to say poor. And so due to that, and due to the lack of capital which we had, you know, at that point in time, we have been forced to decide to go for the licensing model. And by the way, we have been successful because very, very early days, we have been able to sign an agreement with a large OEM, gas turbine supplier, and EPC. And with them, we started to work. But issues, you know, have been immediately raised because, I mean, you know, working, we were fully committed towards our product success, with very high attention to cost, very high attention to standardization. We made, let's say, a license agreement, which was a product license agreement. So we made a front-end engineering design to give to the licensor the work already done and say, okay, you start from here, you just have the balance sheet, you can just go forward and deploy. That's easy. But that's not easy. You know, the engineering team of the licensor has started immediately to try to re-engineering, obviously with a lot of concerns, a lot of, let's say, with a mindset which was totally different from our mindset, with a culture which was totally different, but that's quite obvious, because normally those companies are taught to keep the business stable, not to take risk. But you cannot avoid to take risk if you are a startup or if you have a scale-up. If you want to do something new, if you want to innovate, you need to take some risk. Obviously, you need to be skilled. The skills, and if you want to do it, you know, in the other way around, so deploy directly a demo and then pass to a first of a kind, it is really important that you have all the skills, all the technical skills, but also the execution skills in-house. This is resulting in a much, much faster, let's say, process, because you don't have to go into external iteration, asking for information to external, let's say, engineering team or execution team, which can have a different approach and which result in delays higher cost and, let's say, less focus on the success of the product, on the standardization, the modularization. So to me, really, the choice between licensing and deploy it, let's say, directly is no-brainer. Obviously, you need the right capital, and for that, we need more and more blended finance, as we got from the Catalyst and European Investment Bank. That is really fundamental, is transformational for a company like us, but we need to focus on building up the right teams, the right engineering teams with the right skills, the right execution capabilities, put all together and go fast to the demonstration of the project. This is the lesson we learned in our itinerary. We are going, now we are just completed the civil works for our first of a kind, which is a 20 megawatt, 200 megawatt hour battery, our CO2 battery. And building that together with the Catalyst, we have also tried to build around all the business case. Because what we need to go to be investable from infra fund or people which does not want to take risk is that we have to demonstrate the full business case. They just look at the cash flow. We have to demonstrate that the cash flow generated by this innovation technology is suitable for investment from infra fund. Thank you.
Thank you, Claudio. So Claudio, you brought up a great point, which is, the team. Do you have the team? And we're going to talk a lot more about the team a bit later. But, as you go through your journey and you go from pilot, and now you want to go through the demo, right? You're going to 5 to 20x demo. There comes a decision point, and we've seen many companies sort of struggle with this, which is usually the CTO has been in charge of driving the innovation and driving, how do we get the technology to be optimal, to the cost down, et cetera. And they keep going that journey, and they continuously keep tinkering and trying to optimize. But that unfortunately doesn't lead to building a demo, right? What we see is that you have to really hire someone as a project manager, give them the license, and give them that authority to go drive the design, engineering, and construction of the demo while the CTO continues to innovate, right? I think Matteo said it great yesterday where, hey, you need to start bolting on to your technology team. You need to bolt on an execution team. And in his case, you need to bolt on a manufacturing facility team, right? So the people that try to do it all within the context of a CTO or just one team that keeps tinkering and optimizing, we've seen that fail. And what we really advocate here is to really put a project manager, bring them early on and really start having them to think about how do they do that? How do you split those two functions so that the demo and that journey gets started and gets going? Robert, I know you have experience in this. Do you want to say a few words on this?
Sure, thanks, Mario. I'm Robert Schuetzle, CEO of Infinium. We're an e-fuels company. I think we've learned our lesson from our history, which has been 15 years, and our predecessor company doing gas to liquids, where we originally tried the licensing model. And, if you hand over technology to a group that has best intentions, but you don't control your construction, your commissioning, and maybe most importantly, your operations, there's a lot that can go not the way you want it to. So coming into Infinium, when we really transitioned the whole company to focus on this emerging area of e-fuels, it was very important for us to build a project development team, an execution team, an operations team. We have folks like Aisha and George here today that are really working on project development globally. I would encourage everybody that's at earlier stages of the life cycle to really look at hiring those project development capabilities and that execution team early, maybe even Series A, Series B.
Thank you. And then the next key point, key decision point is how big do you go, right? As Raef said, is what is it that you need to get to in order to convince the market, convince investors you've de-risked it enough. And for us, one of the biggest things we saw is we saw people trying to go from a 1x pilot to a 200x first of a kind, trying to go from a $2 million pilot to a $500 million project, right? And unfortunately, there's a couple very lucky people that can actually get there and do that, and I could probably point those out in my right hand. But the majority of them are not going to be able to do that. Why? Because, again, building at such a large scale has so many risks. So when you are designing your technology, and again, when you're ready to go for that demo, we really advocate that that demo is modular enough so that when you go for your first of a kind, you could just number up, right? It's not a matter of building, going from 1x to 100x, but doing that 1x, 5x, and then that 5x, you just number it up, right? And you multiply by 20, and that's how you get there, right? So modularity is a big thing. Now, this is one of the most controversial ones. In the market testing we did, everyone sort of, said, I can't always modularize everything, right? And sure, that is right. There are some processes where modularity just doesn't work. However, though, the more you can modularize, the components of it, your key technology, that is really what you want to get to, because that is what's going to help you scale up very quickly. Here with us, we have Raffi. You met him yesterday at the session in the afternoon. Raffi, I know this was a big decision for Electric Hydrogen, the company that you lead. Tell us a little bit more about how you thought about modularity.
Thanks, Mario. Pleasure to be here, everybody. Raffi Garabedian, CEO of Electric Hydrogen. We make very large-scale electrolyzers, and modularity scaling is a critical issue for our company. Just to give you a sense for it, Mario, you said everything I want to say, so I'll just get much more specific from our context. We make a 100-megawatt electrolyzer. That's the product. Our product is 1.5 acres in size, right? So hard to think of that as a product. The piece of it that we manufacture is the electrolyzer stack. It's the core technology. It's the energy conversion unit, if you will, right? That's where all the tech is. That stack is the indivisible module. And for us, when we went from pilot to demo for us, and I'll talk about that coming up, demo for us is that indivisible 10-megawatt module in a so-called balance of plant that's scaled accordingly. And as Mario said, the concept of modularity doesn't have to be writ large over the whole product. You can put your technology into buckets of risk. There's buckets of risk that scale very well, like plumbing, pipes, valves, tanks. Very little risk in that, and I think infrastructure investors understand this. There's a bucket of risk that's very hard to scale, the core technology, in our case, the electrolyzer stack. In between, there's an interesting piece, which is integration. And I think the key from an investment standpoint, infrastructure standpoint, is the risk entailed in integrating. Even numbering up a thing has a lot of risk when you go from small scale to big scale. Who knows what happens? Maybe your grid interconnection isn't stable when you put all of these power converters onto the same interconnect. These are the places where you have to be, I think, very cautious and intelligent about modularization, scale up, and how to manage risk. So we'll talk more about that soon.
Thank you. That's great, Raffi. Speaking of risk, build a demo, right? Again, many people want to step this. Many investors say, I don't want you to go CapEx heavy, just, again, license or go for the first of a kind and we're done. But we see it as a huge mistake, right? Because as Raffi talked about, the things that you can learn when building a demo, the things that you can learn about how do you engineer it, how do you construct it, and again, it's the first time you're building that technology, your technology, at a large scale, right? So there's so much learning that comes out of the demo that skipping the demo is a really big mistake. And in fact, the companies that are sitting here have reached success, the level of success they have reached because they've all working or have built demos, very successful demos, right? And success doesn't mean, in the eyes of the investors, many times we see, they want to take a demo and make it, a revenue producing project. And the reality is that's not it. A demo is a really large R&D exercise, very expensive, that, it just needs to happen because you need to prove it at that scale. So Raffi, I'll turn the floor over to you to tell us about the demo, please.
Thanks again, Mario. Hey, everybody. Now I get to stand under the bright lights, and I can not see many of my friends in the audience. In our case, as I mentioned, our demo is a 10 megawatt unit. It's in San Jose, California. If I know you, you can come and visit it. If you want to see a video of it going up, we're down in the innovation showcase in the manufacturing area, and we have a video loop running of the construction of the demo. This is not a commercially operating unit, but we operate it every day. And as Mario said, it is fundamentally an R&D and learning tool. It is not intended to be running lights out, stable. It's a tool to get us there so that when we are in actually our commercial product out in the field, we have all of that learning. We've made as many mistakes as we can on our own clock, on our own dime. That takes a tremendous amount of money, and that's not infrastructure capital. That's super expensive venture dollars. Right? Because, of course, this is not a revenue-generating, profitable activity. It's R&D. By the way, to your first point, Mario, the company actually has gone through a change in its life cycle as we went into constructing our demo. We broke ground on it in San Jose, I think in August of last year. We started placing the process equipment in October, I guess, September or October. We were making first hydrogen in January. And since then, we've been ramping it up and learning, particularly on controls and integration. Pretty fast. You could not do that commercially, right? So very, very fast learning opportunity. It takes a CTO, he's sitting right there, Dave, who's willing to make that transition and not do what you said, Mario, right? Not just focus in the lab, but help to change the culture of the company. Because actually, I don't agree that you can bolt on an execution arm and a project arm, or a manufacturing arm. The culture of the company has to change with its life cycle. When we started out, we were almost 100% R&D. I'm former CTO at First Solar. My co-founder is another former CTO at First Solar. We're a pretty tech-heavy crowd, right? But now, we have project management teams. We have people in the EPC function of our company. We're supply chain. We're very broad. We're very execution focused. And we're starting to build up our commercial muscle as well. So again, get a demo built. You have to do it yourself. That's where you need to make your lessons, make your learnings, make your mistakes so that you don't make them on a commercial project. And that gets you in the right place to have a commercially successful first project and hopefully get down the bankability learning curve so that, that project finance can come in.
Thanks, Raffi. That's great. All right. So we keep going down on this journey of now we built a demo. Let's now go for the first of a kind, right? How do you do that? How do you start planning for that? You know, the lessons aren't as linear here because there's many of them, right? As you prepare your team. But again, you have a demo working, you've learned a lot, and now you need to execute on first of a kind. So a few things come to play here. First of all, the first one is, how do you sharpen your cost down strategy, right? When you're going for the first of a kind, you're going to have to most likely go out and raise the next series. And one of the first questions that we ask, and investors will ask, is, you know, this unit costs 3 times as much as your optimal unit. How are you going to drive that cost down, right? And one of the things we've seen is that companies are overly optimistic about this cost down strategy, from the standpoint that, you know, they sort of believe, they drink their own Kool-Aid and they believe their own story of how fast they can get down, but many times they don't have third-party validation on this, right? We saw a technology where 50% of the costs were civil works, right? And they felt they can get that down in the next 10 years. You know, the whole stack of CapEx, they could get it down to something like 30, 40% of what it was today. Now, anyone that has done civil works, anyone that has done construction knows how hard it is, but also that those costs always go up. It's labor and it escalates, right? So you can't really tell me that you're going to go down to 40% when 50% of your CapEx stack keeps escalating every year with inflation, right? So that's why for us it's super important that companies get third-party validation, right, on the CapEx, on the OpEx, very early on as they're planning their first of a kind, so they can really understand where the costs are going. I think one of the great examples of this is Claudio's technology, Energy Dome, right? It's a technology that's using many off-the-shelf products, but it needs to drive down the cost. The reason why the European Union and Catalyst funded this project is because unfortunately today the technology is not economically viable and we needed to support it. But we were convinced that Claudio and his team were going to be able to drive that cost down. So Claudio, maybe a few words on how do you do that, how you thought about the cost down strategy.
Yeah, thank you. For us, it is key to control the supply chain in order to drive the cost down. So we start from a full understanding of the product that we need. And I'm back to the fact that the team has to be skilled. We use compressor, turbines, heat exchangers, vessels, valve. And we have a perfect understanding of this. We have people which just design turbines, compressor. Me, I have experience in that. And through that, we can really talk in the right way to the supply chain, and we can control, and we can start like, it's like a manufacturing process that we have together with our supply chain. And these, together with a very high focus on standardization and modularization, are the key to drive costs down. That is our experience, because modularization and standardization are something that you need to repeat the purchasing process and get more, let's say, efficient in doing that. So those are the key for us. High skills, to keep all the skills that you need internally, and then to focus very much on modularization and standardization. That is the way to go for drive costs down.
Thank you, Claudio. Okay, the next one is the execution team. Every CEO has touched on this, and we can't emphasize this enough, because again, we see what happens when there isn't a good project execution team. So back in the demo, when we talked about building a demo, you hire your project manager, you gave them that authority to drive that, but now you have to be the first of a kind, and that is a whole nother ballgame. That is, a 30, 50, 60 person team, depending on your technology, that really needs to drive this. So building an execution team is fundamental. And again, not only on the engineering, but the construction, but the capital markets side of it, the project management side of it, because you have to now land on a first of a kind, a whole number of work streams, right? Permitting, land acquisition, interconnection, PPA, offtakes, engineering, many, many things you have to land them at the same time. If you don't have the right team, if you don't have the right team, overseeing this whole process, it is not going to work out. I think one of the great examples of this is Robert Schuetzle's team at Infinium. We've been super impressed with them. The reason we commit to projects many times, a big factor of that is the management and the team. Has the CEO built a strong team around them to be able to execute these first-of-a-kind projects? And the answer for us at Infinium was a definitive yes. So Robert, please tell us a little bit more how you built the team and some of the lessons.
Sure, thanks, Mario. I think it was our lesson in not controlling your own destiny that made Infinium in 2020 really start building out our execution team and adding talent in areas where we didn't have that as a core technology function. So Infinium is both a technology owner, 200 patents globally, we manufacture our own catalysts, but now project developer and project owner. And I'll say that in e-fuels, which is very policy-driven, requires premiums, requires a lot of complicated feedstock contracts, the project execution is more complicated, in my opinion, than the technology. This requires a big package that has to integrate that technology and execution team with deploying your core technology. So again, we brought on folks like Aisha and George to really help with the project development side and to build out that permitting function, that feedstock function, that offtake function. Roger Harris is here, our COO. We'll talk about execution on our Corpus Christi project, which was our first small commercial project. And I'll say we've learned a lot in what it takes that's non-technical to deliver product to customers. The registrations, ISCC+, REACH certification for shipping to Europe. This is the stuff that's non-technical that on your first commercial will hold you up months, quarters, maybe years, and delay revenue. So do that first and build that team early so you can work out that non-technical stuff on your first project that you control.
That's great, Robert. Thank you very much. The next one is offtakes, right? VCs are very focused on revenue generation, as they should be. The next set of investors are super focused on making sure that the company is revenue positive. But there's a downside here to offtakes, right? Many people try to go at them. Many people that can actually sign offtakes, unfortunately, sign them too early, sign them very inflexible, especially on the price, contracts that when the costs start going up, as you do more and more engineering and you're trying to design and engineer your first of a kind, it turns out that those contracts are underwater. The price no longer works for what the project needs. There is also the side of the customer side, which is a lot of customers don't want offtake agreements for projects that aren't going to happen, right? They need, if a chief sustainability officer is going to go fight with the CEO and say, hey, I want to pay 2 times premium for this product, they're not going to do that if they don't think you're going to get the project done. So all these lessons, again, maximize the probability of getting the project done, maximize the probability of getting offtakes actually signed. Raef, I know you're going through this right now. You're, a lithium producing company or technology, and lithium has been at one of the lowest prices in recent years. You're going through the offtake process. Do you want to say a couple of words about, what does that look like for you?
Yeah, just a couple of words would be, it's hard. If there was a couple of other words, I think creativity, looking for creative and flexible solutions would be the others. Where we are today, I think the other thing to think about is who's investing in this first-of-a-kind project? Am I trying to keep a bunch of equity holders happy, or have I got a debt provider in there? If there's a debt provider in there, there's going to be a floor. That's problematic sometimes. So, sometimes thinking about how you invest in the first-of-a-kind is really important. The other part around the flexibility is, we're thinking hard about how we profit share. Can we really, the price we charge for our inputs to the project, or the price we give the off-taker for the output, how does that vary with where pricing is in the marketplace? Are we able to share some of the upside with them? So creativity, flexibility, and don't be surprised that it's a lot harder than you want it to be.
It's hard. So yeah, thank you, Raef. Robert mentioned this earlier about controlling your own destiny, right? Very self-explanatory. When I was a baby project finance banker a long time ago, one of the first things I learned is project-on-project risk, right? My MD would beat it into my head of, hey, that project has project-on-project risk. You have to learn how to identify these things. For people who aren't familiar with that, is basically, you're building a part of a project, and around you there's a whole bunch of stuff happening that needs to happen in order for your project to be successful, right? And what we advocate, again, people say, well, if I just build my tech piece, I need less money from investors, I could dilute less, and I could just get it done. Yes, but if everything else around you is not built, then your project and your technology is not going to be proven, right? So that's what we mean by this. Raffi, tell us about controlling your own destiny, please.
Wow, that's a tough one. We started the company thinking we were making equipment to sell to people, and that's great, but it's equipment that makes hydrogen. And who uses hydrogen? Only a few people, and the people who use it don't want more. It's the new things, right? Decarbonization things. Well, that implies project-on-project risk, but at the corporate level, fundamentally, not even at the project level. So it's a huge problem for, I think, probably everybody in this room, right? Whether it's your feedstock, whether it's the port you're going to ship your product from, any number of factors that all kind of multiply risk at the first, particularly in the first of a kind. I don't have a good answer here, except I think the only approach that makes sense to me is to increase scope, to control as much of your own destiny as you possibly can. Sometimes that can be taken to absurd levels and doesn't make sense, so you have to be reasonable within that construct. But yeah, incorporate or ingest project-on-project risk so that you can actually control the outcome, because no one needs it to work as much as you do.
Thank you. That's great. Okay. So you've now going to do your first of a kind. And what we see many times is the fact that many companies think of this process as linear, right? The pilot, I'm going to do a pilot in the next 2 years, then I'm going to do a demo in the next 2 years, and then maybe in year 5, 6, 7, I'm going to get to first of a kind. That's the first thing we ask very early stage companies on is tell us your path on this, and many times it's a 7-year path, right? And what amazes about that is we don't think investors are going to be patient enough to wait 7 years to prove out this. And such, we've tried to design ways to how do you parallel path a lot of these things, right? And to accelerate the development. So, you know, while you're doing your demo, you're learning those lessons, but you also need to get engineering going and design going on the first of a kind. You know, there's many ways to shortcut these things in a way that doesn't necessarily risk things, but again, accelerates, you know, the process from 7 to, you know, 8 years to like 3 to 4 years, which is really, you know, very impatient capital in the VC world appreciates, and you need to prove this. Robert, you've accelerated this because you've done the demo, but while you were doing the demo, you're already thinking, working on your first of a kind.
Right. So I'll tell a little story. We were honored to have Bill Gates at our facility 3 months ago. It was a great tour. He asked a million questions, all the way from catalyst science to policy, et cetera. But one of the questions he asked, he said, who funded this small commercial project? We have 2 electrolyzers down there, CO2 reuse, 2 CO2 sources, a 35-person operations team. And the answer was our venture investors as part of our Series B. Mitsubishi Heavy Industries, Tak and Ricky are here, AP Ventures, James is here, Amazon, Adi, and Dan and team. And we took FID, and many others, we took FID on this facility before IRA was announced. So a lot of risk in economics and policy. We didn't have the e-fuels policy, but it was important to build that facility and build out that capability. But now as we move on, we'll talk about next how we look at infrastructure finance and what's next beyond doing that first one yourself.
Yeah, thank you, Robert. So that's a great point. You know, the other key decision point is when do you go out to raise the money for your first of a kind projects? We've seen companies go out too early, unfortunately. We've seen companies with very little detail around the project and structure on the project try to go out. There's an example of a company going out, you know, hiring big-time financial advisors, going out to 250 infrastructure investors and getting 1 term sheet, you know, and it wasn't really viable because, again, the pieces of the puzzle were not filled out, the basic pieces of the puzzle. We're not talking about the 20 things that infra investors need, but just the basic, you know, offtake. How are you going to do the power? How are you going to do the engineering? Basic things were not filled out and were not presented in the right way. So, you know, finalizing the puzzle pieces before you go out is super, super important. Raef, you're finalizing the puzzle pieces right now for your first of a kind. Tell us a little bit more about how your team is thinking about finalizing those puzzle pieces.
I'm not sure I've got a good answer for you, Mario. I'm just going to go back to what was said previously. You've got to work on a lot of these things in parallel, and I think it's the role of the CEO or the team to put a target out there about what success looks like when you're finished. So each of these work streams are working in parallel, but they've all got a common goal. They all have a view about what success looks like when we've finished or what it's going to look like. And I think that's the critical part here, okay?
Thanks, Raef. So Robert, you've passed this step. You're, you know, sort of finalized the basic puzzle pieces. You're now out in the market raising money for your first of a kind project. You know, I want to give you the floor because I do think this story is fundamental to what we do at Catalyst, which is how do we get people to this point? We've been working with Robert's team for more than a year now. And again, we don't think is a sure thing. We don't think capital coming in is absolutely 100% guaranteed. If you do the things, if you make the right decisions, what we're trying to do, as I said at the beginning, is increasing the probability that you can raise money, right? Putting you in the best position to raise money. We believe, because we've been working with them, that Robert is in that position now. But again, we still need to prove it. But Robert, I want to give you the floor to tell us about that, please.
Great. Thank you, Mario. Appreciate it. Robert Schuetzle, CEO of Infinium. So Infinium is an e-fuels company. We are both a technology owner and a project developer. Started out our history as a technology company, 200 patents globally. We manufacture our own catalysts. We actually started our history in gas to liquids, converting waste gases to syngas to fuels. Interesting technology to de-risk and allow these facilities to operate at a smaller scale. And I'll say, tying into some of the points earlier, we originally thought 15 years ago we'd sell our catalysts, license our catalysts to everybody in the oil and gas industry. That's not where we landed. You have to control your own destiny. So we built the company. We really transitioned in 2020 to focusing on e-fuels. And even 5 years ago, I think we were called a little bit crazy for talking about converting electrons into molecules. Now it's a very widely discussed topic. But we transitioned to e-fuels. We saw this convergence of green hydrogen, of CO2 reuse, of sustainable aviation fuels. So what we do is we take waste CO2 that would otherwise be emitted to the atmosphere. This can come from an industrial process, a biogenic process, or someday direct air capture. We then take green hydrogen, and Raffi, we do need a lot of green hydrogen, so we are that's imperative to us. We're not an electrolysis company. And we convert that into drop-in transportation fuels, including SAF. We call it eSAF. Not all SAF is created equal. eSAF, we believe, is going to be the future. Diesel, as well as a product called naphtha that's turned into plastic. So that's our execution model. As we talked about already, we took FID on a first small commercial facility. It's in Corpus Christi. It's operating today. It started operations in late 2023. And we do believe it's the world's first small commercial demo e-fuels facility. A lot of what we learned there was around the non-technical stuff, integrating electrolysis, working with our partner on CO2, delivering products to customers, all the regulatory stuff that's held up deliveries and has been challenging. But for the next project, we'll do better because e-fuels is new. And as I mentioned, some very forward-thinking investors helped us take FID on this. Amazon, NextEra Energy, MHI, AP Ventures, a number of others were really forward-thinking in saying, okay, eSAF, e-diesel is going to be the future, but we don't yet know the economics on this. Again, IRA wasn't greenlit. It didn't exist at the time, so we didn't have 45V, we didn't have 45Q, so our investors did this. We've learned a lot from it. Now we have our second project, and that's why I wanted to talk about the financing opportunity. We've learned a lot from Corpus Christi. There are still risks in e-fuels because it's very emerging. In fact, here in the UK, the policy or draft policy on eSAF mandate just came out about a month ago. It's very attractive, but it's very early policy. So as we think about the second project we call Project Roadrunner, is getting into the hundreds of millions of dollars. And to finance this will be a combination of Infinium's venture capital that we're raising at the Topco, but also infrastructure capital. And the first infra deal that we did on this, and has been very catalytic, no pun intended, was with Mario and team to have Breakthrough Energy Catalyst commit $75 million to the project. And while the technology is a mirror or very similar to what we did at Corpus, the big difference here is that commercial wrapper around our second project that is required for infra capital to come in. Few contrasts. In Corpus Christi, we have floating power price. In Roadrunner, we can't do that. We have to fix our inputs. So we've done a long-term PPA with our partner and investor NextEra Energy. Very creative structure because this needs to meet all the requirements of 45V, of our UK compliance for e-fuels. We have a fixed price CO2 contract. So we've fixed our input prices. Then on the revenue side, in conjunction with the deal with Catalyst, we did, and Catalyst was instrumental in bringing American Airlines to the table and Citi, a long-term offtake for our eSAF from this facility. So American Airlines really leaned in on this. This is a very emerging deal. Airlines, fuel buyers don't like to commit to long-term, but what an infrastructure investor needs is committed revenue from a customer that doesn't have policy risk and doesn't have premium risk or floating risk. So as an example of that deal, it's a long-term commitment, City committed to buy Scope 3 emissions on the other side. And again, Catalyst was instrumental in helping make that deal happen. So we're starting to build that wrapper around the project that has nothing to do with the technology, but helps to get the infra capital comfortable with the risk on a project like this. So again, as we go to the next stage, Roadrunner will be a combination of our capital, infra capital, and will still be a creative structure. But what we're building here and what Catalyst has helped us to architect, coming from a team that knows infra deals and has done many of these and knows what the infra capital needs, is that commercial wrapper around this project, which is important for hitting FID on Roadrunner, but really is that template for the $20 billion we need for the next wave of our projects. We have 12 other projects globally, so we can really start getting the steel in the ground and deliver these e-fuels to customers like Amazon, customers like American Airlines, to help them decarbonize their heavy transport, because the demand is there. It's really about getting those projects packaged up correctly to bring the massive amount of infrastructure capital that's out there today. It exists. But how do you de-risk that project? Again, technically, we've talked a lot about, but you have to de-risk it commercially or that capital won't come in. Thank you.
Thank you, Robert. Really well said. So as I said, this is our playbook, and you've gotten a distilled version of it. We're very lucky to have this great, non-paid spokespeople here to really share their knowledge and really, validate a lot of these lessons. But the idea here is not for you to have to write everything down, but as Catalyst, as part of our mission, we are in the next couple of months, we are going to roll this out officially. We are going to continue to engage the ecosystem on how to teach you how to do that, how to teach it how to do this, learn lessons from it, improve our lessons, and continuously improve the innovation that the Catalyst team has brought to the ecosystem and through Breakthrough Energy. And I think one thing I can assure you that when we engage with you, even if we don't necessarily write you a check, we will sort of try to help you in your particular situation, how to make the best decisions for your technology and how to get you to that cheaper cost of capital. Because we have the flexible capital, we have the team, and we have the mission to do it. So I appreciate our CEOs. Let's give them a round of applause, please. I appreciate you listening, and we hope to engage you in the near future. Thank you so much. Appreciate it.